For centuries, the image of Jesus Christ has been depicted in a way that doesn't truly reflect the historical cultural reality of his time. The common portrayal of Jesus as a white man with light skin and European features has led to misconceptions that obscure the true identity of one of the most influential figures in human history. But today, we are here to dive deep into the truth. Jesus is black, and we are going to explore the historical, biblical, and cultural evidence that confirms this powerful fact. This isn't about race, this is about truth. It's about understanding Jesus as he truly was connected to his people and his heritage, and embracing a fuller, more authentic view of Christ, his bounded price, his profound impact on the world, especially within the black community. Let's open our minds and hearts to the truth. For centuries, the narrative of Jesus Christ has been misrepresented, not only in art and media, but also in the way people approach his life and teachings. Jesus is often depicted as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed man, a figure that doesn't represent the historical and geographical context he came from. But the truth is far different, and we are going to look at the evidence that supports Jesus being of African descent, with physical features aligning with the people of the Middle East, particularly those of the African and Semitic lineage. The historical context of Jesus' time. To understand who Jesus was, what he stood for, and how his message shaped the world, it is essential to examine the historical context of his time. Jesus Christ lived during the 1st century CE, a period that was marked by a complex web of political, social, religious, and cultural dynamics. This context not only influenced his teachings, but also contributed to the way he interacted with the people around him, the challenges he faced, and the legacy he left behind. Roman occupation in Jewish society. At the time of Jesus' birth, the region of Judea, modern-day Israel, was under Roman occupation. The Roman Empire had conquered the area, and Roman soldiers, governors, and political rulers controlled the land. The local population, however, was primarily Jewish, and their identity and culture were deeply rooted in the Hebrew scriptures, customs, and religious traditions. The Jews had a long history of resistance to foreign rule, with several uprisings and revolts occurring throughout the centuries. Under Roman rule, the Jews had some degree of autonomy in religious matters, but were still subjected to Roman laws and taxes. The Roman Empire was known for its religious tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their local religious practices, but this often led to tensions between the Jews and the ruling Romans. The presence of Roman soldiers, the imposition of Roman taxes, and the control of the Jewish high priest by Roman authorities created a climate of resentment among the Jewish people. During this time, there was widespread anticipation of a Messiah, divinely appointed leader, who would deliver the Jewish people from oppression and restore their sovereignty. So many Jews were hoping for a political and military leader who would free them from Roman rule, reestablish the kingdom of Israel, and usher in a new era of peace and prosperity. The expectation of the Messiah was widespread, and various movements and individuals arose claiming to be the promised leader. However, Jesus' arrival and his message were different from what most people expected. The influence of Hellenistic culture. In addition to Roman domination, the Jewish people were also heavily influenced by Hellenistic culture. Following the conquests of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, much of the Mediterranean world, including Judea, became part of the Hellenistic Empire. Greek language, philosophy, and ideas spread throughout the region, affecting everything from art and architecture to religion and daily life. The Greek language became the lingua franca of the Eastern Roman Empire, which made communication across different regions easier. However, the spread of Greek culture also created tensions within Jewish society, as some Jews adopted Hellenistic ways and others resisted them in favor of traditional Jewish practices. This divide between Hellenistic Jews, those who embraced Greek culture, and Hasidic Jews, those who clung to traditional Jewish customs, was one of the key sources of internal conflict within the Jewish community at the time of Jesus. Additionally, the Hellenistic influence brought about new philosophical and religious ideas that were sometimes at odds with traditional Jewish teachings. This environment created fertile ground for the emergence of new religious movements, including Christianity, a movement that at first was seen as a radical departure from Judaism. Jewish religious leadership. The religious leadership in Judea was also a critical factor in the historical context of Jesus' time. The Pharisees and Sadducees were two dominant Jewish sects, each with differing views on religion, the law, and the afterlife. The Pharisees were known for their strict adherence to the law of Moses and the traditions of the elders, while the Sadducees were more aligned with the priestly class and had more liberal interpretations of the law. The Essenes, another Jewish sect, lived in isolated communities and were focused on ritual purity and awaiting the coming of the Messiah. The religious elite of the time, including the high priests and members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, held significant power and influence over the Jewish population. These leaders were often in conflict with Jesus as his teachings challenged both the religious and political status quo. Jesus' message of love, humility, and salvation through faith did not align with the rigid religious practices that were enforced by the Pharisees and Sadducees. Economic conditions and social divisions. The social and economic conditions in Judea during the time of Jesus were marked by extreme poverty, especially among the common people. The majority of the population lived in poverty, struggling to survive under Roman taxation and the economic burden placed on them by the ruling elite. This created sharp divisions between the wealthy and the poor, with the ruling classes benefiting from their control of land, taxes, and religious authority. Jesus' ministry was deeply concerned with the plight of the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized. His message was one of social justice, calling for a kingdom where the last would be first, the poor would be blessed, and the humble would be exalted. Jesus often sided with the marginalized, healing the sick, including the lepers, and spending time with tax collectors and sinners groups that were ostracized by the religious elite. The role of prophecy and expectation. Jesus' arrival in this charged environment was not an accident. Prophecy played a significant role in the Jewish worldview at the time, and many Jews believed that the Messiah would fulfill specific prophecies laid out in the Hebrew scriptures. The prophecy of a coming Davidic king who would reign from Jerusalem and restore Israel was central to the Jewish hope of liberation. Many Jews, however, expected a warrior king, a political and military leader who would overthrow Roman rule by force. But Jesus, instead of leading a revolt, preached a message of peace, love, and reconciliation. Jesus' approach to the role of the Messiah was radically different. He did not come to lead a political revolution or to wield worldly power. Instead, his message was spiritual and transformative, calling people to a personal relationship with God and a new way of living that was centered on love, forgiveness, and humility. The historical context of Jesus' time was one of profound political, religious, and social upheaval. With the Roman Empire occupying Judea, the influence of Hellenistic culture, and the tension within the Jewish community over religious practices and the expectation of the Messiah, Jesus' life and teachings were revolutionary. His message, which emphasized love, peace, humility, and a personal connection with God, challenged both the Roman rulers and the Jewish authorities. Understanding this historical context helps us appreciate the depth of Jesus' message and its enduring impact on the world. His teachings remain relevant today, calling us to embrace a life of compassion, justice, and faith, values that transcend time and place. Physical features of Jesus. The physical appearance of Jesus Christ as a Christ is subject of much curiosity and debate. Over the centuries, Jesus has been depicted in countless ways, particularly in art. with varying interpretations based on the culture and context of the artist. However, to truly understand what Jesus might have looked like, we must look beyond modern depictions and turn to historical, cultural, and geographical evidence that can provide a more accurate picture of his physical features. Jesus in historical context. To accurately understand Jesus' physical features, it's important to first consider the historical and cultural context in which he lived. Jesus was born around 4 to 6 BCE in Bethlehem, located in the region of Judea under Roman occupation. Judea was a part of the ancient Near East, with a population primarily composed of Jews who shared common ancestry and physical traits with the surrounding Semitic and African peoples. Given the geography of the region, Jesus would have looked like other men of his time, Middle Eastern and African in descent. This means he likely had features that were typical of the people of that area, such as dark skin, dark eyes, and dark, possibly curly hair. Modern depictions, particularly those created by European artists, which often show Jesus as having fair skin and light hair, are historically inaccurate, as they reflect the cultural and racial ideals of those artists, not the reality of Jesus' appearance. The Book of Revelation, a biblical description. One of the few descriptions of Jesus' physical features in the Bible comes from the Book of Revelation, specifically Revelation 1:14-15. In this passage, the Apostle John describes a vision of the risen Christ. John writes, "The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters." Revelation 1:14-15 Niv. This description gives us a glimpse into the physical appearance of Jesus. The hair like wool suggests that Jesus had tightly curled or textured hair, which is a characteristic more commonly associated with African and Middle Eastern peoples. The reference to bronze-colored feet indicates that Jesus' skin had a dark complexion, likely reflecting the darker tones typical of the people living in that region. While this description in Revelation may be more symbolic in nature, many scholars interpret it to offer a clue about Jesus' physical appearance, particularly his hair texture and skin color. The association of woolly hair and bronze skin further supports the idea that Jesus was not the fair-skinned European figure often depicted in Western art, but rather a man with features common among the people of Africa and the ancient Near East. Cultural and geographical influences. In order to gain a deeper understanding of what Jesus looked like, it's crucial to examine the cultural and geographical context of the region in which he lived. The people of ancient Judea, which included Jews, Samaritans, and various other groups, would have shared physical characteristics similar to those of the broader Mediterranean and Middle Eastern populations. Jesus would have been born into a Jewish family, and Jews in that region at the time typically had olive to dark skin tones, brown eyes, and dark coarse hair. As a descendant of King David, his lineage places him firmly within the context of Semitic peoples, who were of Middle Eastern and African descent. This ethnic background further supports the idea that Jesus would have had a dark complexion, akin to the people of modern-day Israel, Palestine, and surrounding regions. Roman influence and the Jews of the diaspora. While the Jewish people in Judea were generally homogeneous in terms of their physical features, it's important to remember that the Roman Empire's vast influence created a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities. As a result, there were people of different backgrounds living in Judea at the time of Jesus, including Greeks, Romans, and other Mediterranean groups. Despite this cultural diversity, the Jewish people maintained their distinct identity, and Jesus, as a Jew, would have been primarily influenced by the typical features of his ethnic group. Additionally, during this time, the Jewish people had been in contact with African civilizations, particularly Egypt and Ethiopia. The interaction between Jews and African nations was long-standing, and these relationships had an influence on the physical features of the Jewish people. Jesus' appearance, therefore, may have reflected not only his Semitic heritage, but also the diverse, mixed ancestry of the region. Contradicting the Western depictions of Jesus, over the centuries, artists, particularly during the Renaissance and later periods, began to depict Jesus according to the ideals of the societies they were part of. European artists in particular began to portray Jesus as a fair-skinned European man with light brown hair and blue eyes. This image of Jesus became so widespread that it has remained entrenched in popular culture for centuries. However, historical and cultural evidence contradicts this image. The assumption that Jesus was a fair-skinned man is not supported by the historical context of his life. As mentioned earlier, Jesus was born in Judea, a region that was predominantly populated by Jews of Middle Eastern and African descent. The fact that he was born into a poor family, living in a humble town, and surrounded by people of a similar ethnic background would have made him appear quite different from the European portrayal we see in modern art, modern reconstructions, and anthropological studies. In recent years, forensic anthropologists and scholars have attempted to reconstruct the physical appearance of people from ancient Judea based on historical and archaeological evidence. These reconstructions suggest that Jesus, like other people of his time, would have had short, dark, curly hair, a dark complexion, and Middle Eastern facial features. These reconstructions are based on studies of ancient skulls and the physical features of modern-day populations in the region, providing a more accurate depiction of what Jesus likely looked like. Additionally, Jewish men of the time were typically of average height and built around 5'1" to 5'5" tall, and they would have had a relatively lean physique due to the physical demands of daily life and the scarcity of food for the poor. The physical features of Jesus, as portrayed in ancient texts, cultural context, and modern research, offer a compelling picture of a man who was likely of dark skin, curly hair, and Middle Eastern features. These characteristics reflect the reality of his time and place a Jewish man living in ancient Judea under Roman rule. The depictions of Jesus in Western art, which often portray him as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed man, are historically inaccurate and shaped by cultural and racial ideals that have little to do with the true identity of Jesus. Understanding the historical and cultural reality of Jesus' appearance not only helps to correct centuries of misrepresentation, but also brings us closer to the true nature of his ministry and message. Jesus' physical appearance, while not central to his teachings, provides an important reminder that he came for all people, regardless of race or ethnicity, and his message transcends cultural boundaries. Jesus was a man of his time, and his legacy continues to impact every corner of the world today. Jesus' impact on the Black community. The impact of Jesus Christ on the Black community, both historically and the present day, is profound, far-reaching, and multifaceted. Throughout history, the message of Jesus has resonated deeply with Black individuals, providing strength, hope, and a sense of purpose during times of oppression, struggle, and adversity. From the transatlantic slave trade to the civil rights movement and beyond, the teachings of Jesus have been a source of empowerment for Black people, offering spiritual solace and a vision for justice, equality, and freedom. The role of Jesus in the enslaved community. One of the most significant ways in which Jesus impacted the Black community was during the period of slavery in the United States. Enslaved Africans who were forcibly brought to America often endured unimaginable hardships, including brutal physical labor separating from their families and systematic dehumanization. In such a context, the message of Jesus provided hope and a sense of dignity. The Bible, particularly the stories of liberation in the Old Testament, such as the Exodus story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, became central to the enslaved Black community. They identified with the plight of the Israelites, seeing parallels between their own suffering under the yoke of slavery and the oppression endured by the ancient Hebrews. The idea of a God who cared for the oppressed and delivered them from bondage resonated deeply within the black community. Many enslaved black people embraced Christianity and found solace in the teachings of Jesus, particularly his messages of love, compassion, and forgiveness. The Sermon on the Mount, with its emphasis on loving one's enemies, the meek inheriting the earth, and the promise of justice, became a beacon of hope. They believed that through Jesus they could find spiritual freedom, even when they were physically bound in chains. The black church as a source of resistance and identity. The black church has been central to the black experience in America, and Jesus' teachings played a crucial role in the development of this institution. The church served as a place of refuge, solidarity, and resistance during the darkest hours of slavery and segregation. Jesus' message of liberation was often interpreted by black preachers and church leaders as a call for social justice, equality, and an end to racial oppression. The black church became not just a place of worship, but also a political and cultural center for black communities. The stories of Jesus' miracles, his compassionate healing of the sick, and his advocacy for the poor and marginalized were used as a foundation for activism in the fight for civil rights and racial equality. Figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. drew inspiration from Jesus' nonviolent approach to justice, famously declaring that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people. King often referred to Jesus' teachings on love, peace, and justice as the moral foundation for the civil rights movement. Jesus and the struggle for racial justice. Throughout the 20th century and into the present, Jesus' message has continued to inspire black activists and leaders fighting for racial justice. The teachings of Jesus on equality, human dignity, and justice were central to the efforts to end segregation and discrimination in the United States. In the face of systemic racism, police brutality, and economic disparities, black people have continued to turn to the teachings of Jesus as a source of inspiration. Many in the black community see Jesus as a champion of the oppressed, the poor, and the marginalized. His life was one of challenging the status quo and standing up to unjust authority, which resonates deeply in the black struggle for civil rights and equality. Jesus' compassion for the downtrodden and his commitment to justice have made him an enduring figure for black communities worldwide. His life exemplified the fight for justice, and his death and resurrection symbolized hope and victory over oppression. In a world that often marginalizes black voices, the teachings of Jesus offer a powerful reminder that all people are created in the image of God and are deserving of dignity, respect, and love. Jesus' impact in contemporary black communities. In contemporary society, Jesus continues to influence the lives of black individuals and communities. For many, faith in Jesus provides strength in the face of ongoing racial injustice and inequality. The black church remains a cornerstone of many black communities, providing not only a space for worship, but also support networks, educational opportunities, and social services. Additionally, Jesus' message of reconciliation and peace is vital in the ongoing quest for unity among diverse communities. In the face of political division and racial tensions, the call of Jesus to love one's neighbor and forgive one's enemies resonates as a guiding principle for healing and transformation in society. The intersection of faith and activism continues to thrive within the black community, with black Christian leaders advocating for justice, advocating for those who are oppressed, and working toward creating a more just and equitable society. The Black Lives Matter movement, for example, has often invoked Christian principles of justice, love, and human dignity, drawing from the belief that Jesus came to lift up the oppressed and marginalized. Jesus' impact on the black community is deeply intertwined with the struggles for freedom, justice, and equality. From the days of slavery to the modern-day fight for civil rights and racial justice, Jesus' teachings have inspired hope, unity, and action among black people. His message of love, healing, and liberation continues to resonate, reminding us that through faith in Jesus, True freedom is found both spiritually and socially. His life and teachings have empowered countless individuals in the Black community to resist oppression, seek justice, and create a more equitable world for all people.